A Maid trash. Chloe's acrylic rhinestone-studded nails dug into my bicep. They tore right through the cheap fabric of my bridesmaid dress, biting deep into my skin. She snatched a metal tray loaded with half-empty champagne flutes, stained napkins, and used toothpicks from a passing waiter, then shoved the filthy thing hard against my chest. Leftover liquor sloshed over the rim, soaking the cuff of my sleeve. "Stay out of the VIP section. Stop humiliating me," she hissed through her teeth, her eyes wide and twisted. "You are nothing but a pathetic IT tech. If you know what is good for you, take this garbage into the kitchen, keep your head down, and play the maid you were meant to be." 5 steps away, my mother stood with her arms crossed. She saw the blood welling up under Chloe's nails. She did not flinch. She just turned her face away, perfectly fine with letting her eldest daughter be publicly degraded in front of hundreds of high society guests. Underneath this ragged dress, I am a commander in the United States Navy. I hold the lives of tens of thousands of sailors across the Pacific in my hands. But here inside the Ritz-Carlton, the people who share my blood are stomping me into the dirt like a piece of trash. But before I tell you why, tonight was the first time in 14 years they actually saw me and who was left trembling to pay the price. Hit like, subscribe, and do not go anywhere. Because what happens next, no one in this room could have ever imagined. To understand the sheer lunacy inside that ballroom, you have to rewind exactly 48 hours. The tires of a beat-up yellow cab crunched over the pristine gravel of the Loudoun County estate. I stepped out, shifting a 40-pound tactical go-bag onto my shoulder. No welcome banners, no hugs, not a single text message after a 20-hour military flight from Okinawa. The heavy oak front door cracked open. Janet, my mother, peeked out. She did not look at my face. Her eyes instantly darted to the exhaust pipe of the cheap taxi, pulling away her features, contorting in absolute horror. Her manicured hand shot out, grabbing my wrist and yanking me inside the foyer like I was some sort of illegal contraband. "Go upstairs and shower immediately," she snapped, keeping her voice low. Her eyes raked over my faded cargo pants and gray t-shirt with open disgust. "Wash that cheap smell off you before the neighbors see. And do not let that heavy bag scratch my Italian marble." That was it. 2 years deployed in the Pacific, and my mother's primary concern was the optics of my arrival. I shifted the heavy canvas strap on my shoulder. Inside that bag sat a retinal-locked national security encryption terminal capable of tracking hostile assets globally. She treated it like a sack of dirty laundry. Dinner was served an hour later under the cold, blinding glare of a crystal chandelier. The dining room smelled of expensive vanilla candles and stale money. Robert sat at the head of the long mahogany table. My father, a man who measured a human being's right to breathe by their stock portfolio and quarterly returns. For 20 straight minutes, he droned on about hedge fund margins, offshore accounts, and capital gains taxes, pausing only to sip a $200 Cabernet. He did not acknowledge I was in the room. He did not ask if I had dodged bullets or buried friends over the last 2 years. I sat at the far corner of the table, entirely invisible. I looked down at the dry, overcooked steak on my porcelain plate. The sharp squeak of my knife cutting across the ceramic was the only sound tying me to reality. My hands, heavily calloused and scarred hands that could strip and reassemble an M4 carbine in pitch darkness, now performed this domestic task with cold mechanical precision. Cut, chew, swallow. I had turned myself into a ghost inside my own childhood home. It was easier that way. Across from me, Chloe swirled her wine. Her blonde hair was curled into perfect, expensive waves. She smirked, her eyes gleaming with that familiar hollow cruelty she had spent years perfecting. "So," Chloe drawled, leaning forward, tapping her nails against her glass. "Still plugging in Ethernet cables for the government. You know Mark's firm is hiring for the IT help desk. It pays barely above minimum wage, but hey, for a pathetic computer repair girl, it is a step up. You could reset passwords for real professionals." Janet nodded in quiet agreement, gracefully cutting her asparagus. Robert just gave a vague, dismissive shrug, entirely unbothered by his youngest daughter's venom. I kept my jaw locked. They had no idea. 3 days ago, I sat in a classified bunker, restructuring the entire cyber defense grid for the 7th Fleet. A single keystroke from my hand dictated the movement of nuclear submarines in the South China Sea. The security clearance attached to my retinas was worth more than the combined net worth of everyone sitting at this pretentious table. But I said nothing. I placed my knife and fork down perfectly parallel on the edge of the plate. Combat experience drills one absolute truth into your skull: you never waste live ammunition firing at a reinforced concrete wall. Without a word, I gathered my dirty plates. I kept my spine rigidly straight, squared my shoulders, and walked into the kitchen. My silence was not submission. It was a calculated, tactical withdrawal. I stood at the stainless steel sink, turning on the cold water. I watched the grease and soap suds swirl down the drain, feeling the icy water numb my knuckles. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only peace I had felt all day. It lasted exactly 2 minutes. I dried my hands and stepped out of the kitchen. The hallway leading to the stairs was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the security system panel. The moment my heavy boot hit the hardwood floor, a shadow lunged into my path. Chloe stood blocking the bottom of the staircase. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, the smug smirk completely gone from her face. In the dim light, her features were twisted into something rabid and desperate. She was not done. She was ready to draw blood. Chloe's manicured index finger jammed hard into my collarbone. It was a sharp, aggressive jab, the kind you give to a misbehaving dog. "Listen to me very carefully." She spat, her voice a low, frantic hiss. "General Marcus Sterling is coming to the wedding. He is a major defense contractor, partner with Mark's father, elite, top tier. You are not to go anywhere near him." She jabbed me again, harder this time. "Do not open your mouth. Do not ask for a job. I will not have you dragging your broke, pathetic loser energy over to his table. You fixing computers for minimum wage is embarrassing enough. You will not taint my new family's reputation." I looked down at her finger, pressing into my skin. She was terrified that a tech support nobody would somehow offend a 4-star admiral. She had no idea that General Sterling was the exact same commander who had sent me a classified encrypted cable just last week, personally commending my tactical intelligence strategy in the Philippine Sea. I stared into her wide, narcissistic eyes, and just like that, the air in the hallway vanished. The memory of 14 years ago slammed into my chest like a sledgehammer. I was 18 again, standing in Robert's plush home office. The air smelled of cigar smoke and expensive leather. I had placed a single sheet of paper on his heavy mahogany desk, a federal student loan cosigner agreement for the Naval Academy. It was my ticket out, my chance to build something real. I had the grades, I had the physical scores. All I needed was his signature. Just a stroke of a pen on a dotted line. Robert did not even look up from his financial reports. He picked up the paper between 2 fingers, glanced at the military letterhead, and scoffed. It was a dry, ugly sound. Without a word of explanation, he tore the document in half, then in quarters. He tossed the shredded pieces right into my face. The heavy paper fluttered down, landing on my cheap sneakers. "The military is for the uneducated and the desperate." He had said, his voice flat, completely devoid of anything resembling fatherly affection. "It is for grunts who cannot cut it in the real world. You want a future. Go find a rich husband like your sister is doing. If you put on a uniform, do not ever expect another dime from this house." And he kept his word. They cut me off entirely. While Chloe was handed unlimited credit cards and a brand new BMW for barely passing her business degree, I was scrubbing toilets at a diner off Route 50. I spent my youth hauling trash bags and washing grease-caked dishes until my knuckles cracked and bled. Every minimum wage dollar I scraped together went straight to buying combat boots, tactical manuals, and protein powder. They threw me to the wolves, expecting me to come crawling back, begging for a handout. Only one person in this entire bloodline saw what I was actually doing. Nana Rose. I remembered sitting by her hospice bed, the sterile smell of the hospital room, the steady morbid beep of the heart monitor. I was 19, exhausted, hiding my blistered hands under the blanket. She reached out with papery, frail fingers and gripped my rough hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "This family likes roses," Nana Rose had whispered, her breathing shallow. "They like things that look expensive but wilt the second a storm hits. You are not a rose, Alice. You are an oak. She coughed a dry, rattling sound, but her eyes were fiercely sharp. The wind will snap your branches. The frost will try to kill you. But your roots are digging deep into the rock. Long after their petals rot, you will still be standing. Remember that. I snapped back to the present. The dark hallway. Chloe's furious, twitching face. My hand moved instinctively, sliding under the collar of my gray shirt. My fingers curled around the cold, stamped metal of my dog tags. The weight of them against my chest was my armor. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Nana Rose's words were the only inheritance I ever needed. I reached up and clamped my hand over Chloe's wrist. I did not squeeze hard, just enough to let her feel the dense, unyielding muscle built by years of hauling gear through the mud. I shoved her hand off my collarbone. "I understand," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, not a single ripple of emotion. "I will not bother your general." Chloe sneered, satisfied that she had successfully bullied the family failure back into her corner. She spun on her designer heels and stomped back toward the kitchen. I walked up the stairs. The wood groaned under my boots. I stepped into the small guest bedroom and shut the door. The deadbolt clicked into place, a sharp, metallic finality. They really thought I was just a pawn. A broke, pathetic punching bag they could kick around to make themselves feel taller. They had no idea that a countdown had just started. Tonight was the last night I would ever play the peasant. Exactly 0500 hours. My eyes snapped open. The internal clock never fails. Muscle memory took over before my brain even fully registered the dark popcorn ceiling of the guest bedroom. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. Boots on, laces pulled tight. I slipped into the cramped, windowless bathroom and cranked the shower handle all the way to the hottest setting. Scalding water hit the cheap fiberglass tub like a burst of static. Thick, blinding steam began to fill the small space. White noise. Basic anti-eavesdropping protocol. I sat down on the cold plastic of the closed toilet lid and pulled a heavy black Pelican case from my duffel bag. I flipped the heavy steel latches. They popped open with a dull, satisfying click. I booted up the encrypted satellite terminal. 24 alphanumeric keystrokes typed in rapid succession. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, pale blue glow across the grimy bathroom tiles. Red alert. A nuclear submarine fleet had gone completely dark somewhere deep in the South China Sea. Communication lines were severed. Hostile sonar pings were closing in on their last known grid. For the next 2 hours, breathing in air thick with the smell of cheap jasmine soap and heavy suffocating steam, I was not the family disappointment. I was a United States Navy commander. I held the lives of 130 Marines in the palm of my heavily calloused hand. I typed encrypted commands executing depth changes and evasive coordinate shifts in complete silence. My pulse stayed flat. My eyes never left the radar sweep. Every single second carried the weight of a body bag. 0700 hours. A violent, frantic pounding rattled the bathroom door. The cheap wood shook in its frame. I slammed the terminal shut. I shoved the black case deep into a woven wicker laundry hamper and buried it under 3 damp, heavy bath towels. I reached over and unlocked the door. Chloe shoved her way inside before I even had the brass handle fully turned. The overpowering scent of her expensive floral perfume cut straight through the humidity. She carried a massive tangled pile of wrinkled blush-pink fabric in her arms. Without a word of greeting, she threw the massive ball of cheap polyester directly at my chest. I caught it purely on reflex, the slippery fabric sliding against my forearms. "Iron these," she demanded. Her voice was grating, highly pitched, and entirely stripped of any basic human decency. "Every single bridesmaid robe. The photographer is coming at 9 to do the matching getting ready shots. Use the steam setting and do not burn them. If you ruin my pictures with your usual incompetence, I swear to God." She stopped looking me up and down. Her lip curled in absolute disgust at my gray shirt and cargo pants. "Just keep your head down and make yourself useful for once. Manual labor suits that pathetic, miserable face of yours anyway." She spun around on her bare heels and marched out into the hall. She did not wait for an answer. She did not even bother to close the door. For the next hour, I existed in the most insane, disjointed, split reality imaginable. I stood at a flimsy, squeaking ironing board set up in the narrow upstairs hallway. In my left hand, I held a cheap plastic steam iron. It hissed and spit drops of boiling water onto the board. I pressed the hot metal down carefully, smoothing out the stubborn creases of a tacky $20 robe. In my right hand, I held a military-grade encrypted smartphone. My thumb scrolled past a highly classified prompt. I tapped a 12-digit authorization code. I was confirming the launch sequence for an electromagnetic decoy drone system, a $2 billion piece of war machinery floating out in the unforgiving Pacific Ocean. The sheer absurdity of the situation tasted like old copper in my mouth. The Department of Defense of the United States was currently holding its collective breath. Generals in the Pentagon were staring at screens, waiting for my exact nod so we did not trigger a global conflict. My brain was calculating blast radiuses, sonar evasion tactics, and satellite blind spots. Meanwhile, the people who shared my DNA were using me as an unpaid maid. Weaponized incompetence at its absolute finest. Chloe could not operate an iron to save her life, so she dumped the task on the designated family loser. They knew I would do it perfectly because I did everything perfectly. And they used that ingrained military discipline to degrade me, forcing me into a role of pure servitude. Steam hissed sharply. A drop of boiling water landed on my wrist, leaving a bright red mark. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I pressed send on the launch code. The black phone vibrated heavily against my palm. A single sharp buzz. A secure text message lit up the dark screen. Master Chief Henderson, signal restored. Assault team is safe. Decoys successful. Thank you, Commander. Do not let the civilians at home drive you crazy. I stared at the glowing green letters against the black background. The corner of my mouth twitched into a bitter, humorless smile. A seasoned combat veteran thousands of miles away, waist-deep in salt water and enemy territory, respected me more than the people sleeping in the bedrooms right next to me. True brotherhood is forged under fire. Bloodline is just a random accident of biology. I deleted the message. I wiped the phone memory clean and shoved it deep into the reinforced cargo pocket of my pants. I reached out and yanked the iron cord out of the wall socket. The hissing finally died down. I gathered the neat, perfectly pressed stack of pink robes and draped them carefully over my forearm. Not a single wrinkle left. My face was a mask of cold stone. I stepped away from the ironing board and walked out toward the main living room to deliver the laundry. I had no idea that an even more disgusting, pathetic circus was already waiting for me on the other side of the wall. I carried the stack of perfectly pressed robes down the hallway and pushed open the heavy double doors to the main living room. I expected to drop the laundry on the sofa and slip out the back door. Instead, I walked straight into a psychological train wreck. A piercing, high-pitched scream bounced off the vaulted ceiling. It was Chloe. She was standing in the middle of the expensive Persian rug, holding a single cloth napkin up to the light of the crystal chandelier. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her freshly applied makeup. She looked like someone had just shot her dog. "This is blush pink," she shrieked, her voice cracking in pure hysteria. She threw the napkin onto the glass coffee table like it was laced with poison. "The wedding palette is dusty rose. The entire reception is going to look like a cheap circus. My life is completely ruined." Across the room, Robert was pacing in front of the fireplace, his face flushed an ugly shade of purple. He was screaming into his phone, threatening to sue the elite wedding planning agency for breach of contract and severe emotional distress. Janet sat collapsed on the white leather sofa, clutching her chest, gasping for air as if the wrong shade of pink fabric had physically punctured her lungs. The absurdity in the room was suffocating. I stood there holding the cheap polyester robes, watching three grown adults completely lose their grip on reality. To them, a slightly off-color piece of fabric was the end of the world. I let out a heavy, exhausted sigh. I did not mean to do it out loud, but the sound cut through the frantic crying. Mark heard it. The groom was leaning against the mahogany bar, completely unbothered by his fiancée's meltdown. He was the poster child for generational wealth, wearing a designer quarter-zip sweater, loafers with no socks, and hair stiff with an offensive amount of expensive gel. He set his mimosa down and walked over to me. He flashed a smug, condescending smile, the kind of smile a guy gives to a stray dog before kicking it off the porch. He reached out and patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavy, presumptuous, and deeply insulting. He leaned in, lowering his voice into a patronizing whisper. "Look, Alice, I get it," Mark said, dripping with fake pity. "You are single, broke, and angry at the world. It is tough watching your little sister get everything you never had. But do not stand over there sighing and bringing your bitter energy into this. Do not ruin her day just because you are a miserable IT tech." My jaw locked. The muscles in my neck pulled tight. Mark chuckled, oblivious to the fact that he was standing inches away from a live wire. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver money clip. "Just play the good maid today," he said, peeling off 3 crisp $100 bills. He tried to tuck them into the front pocket of my cargo pants. "Keep your mouth shut, serve the drinks, and take this. Go pay your rent. Buy yourself a cat. Just stop acting so pathetic." A trust fund paper pusher, a guy who relied on his daddy's connections to get a middle management job, was trying to hand out tip money to a naval cyber warfare commander. He thought his $300 could buy my dignity. Janet spotted me. She shot up from the couch, her grief over the napkins instantly vanishing, replaced by pure venom. "What is she doing standing there staring?" Janet yelled, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Get those robes upstairs. You are dragging this heavy, pathetic aura into the room and ruining the feng shui. Give me those." She lunged forward, reaching out to rip the stack of robes from my arms. At that exact second, the heavy tactical device buried deep in my cargo pocket went off. It was not a normal phone ringtone. It was a violent, bone-rattling mechanical vibration. Bees, zizzy, beezy, zizzy, beezy, zizzy. 3 long bursts. The metal housing of the device smacked hard against my thigh. Red alert. A catastrophic breach in an anti-aircraft defense grid. Chloe clamped her hands over her ears, her face twisting in disgust. "Turn off that garbage. Are your cheap debt collectors calling you on the morning of my wedding?" I did not look at Chloe. I did not look at Janet. I looked dead at Mark. I dropped the stack of pink robes right onto the floor. They hit his expensive loafers. Before he could react, I raised my left arm and swatted his patronizing hand off my shoulder. I did not just push him. I struck his forearm with a hard, calculated palm strike. Mark stumbled backward, his eyes going wide in sudden shock. He rubbed his arm, the smug smile completely wiped from his face. I took 1 step back. The transition was instant. The slouched, invisible maid died on that rug. My spine snapped straight, my shoulders squared. I pulled my center of gravity down, rooting my boots into the floor. I drew a deep breath into my diaphragm. I pulled the bulky, black encrypted phone from my pocket and pressed the receiver to my ear. My voice dropped an octave. It was cold, sharp, and carried the absolute, unforgiving authority of military command. "Burns!" I barked into the receiver, cutting right through the silence in the room. "Authenticate Alpha Zulu. Hostile breach confirmed. Open the backup grid immediately. Scramble the interceptors." I did not wait for a response. I did not spare a single glance at the 3 people standing around me with their mouths hanging wide open in utter disbelief. I turned on my heel, my boots hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy rhythmic thud. I walked straight out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. Let them cry over their pink napkins. My sailors were in the crosshairs. If you have ever had to bite your tongue while some arrogant, entitled jerk tried to use their money to humiliate you, hit the like button on this video. And drop a comment below telling me about the exact moment you realized you were infinitely greater than their pathetic judgment. We are back at the Ritz-Carlton. Present time. The grand ballroom was suffocating. A massive vaulted space dripping with imported crystal chandeliers, towering arrangements of white orchids, and the overwhelming stench of old money and new arrogance. A live jazz band played a smooth, heavy bass line in the corner. Hundreds of guests in bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns clinked expensive champagne flutes, their forced, fake laughter echoing off the marble pillars. And right in the dead center of it all, I was bleeding. Chloe's acrylic rhinestone-studded nails were buried deep into my left bicep. She gripped my arm with the frantic, unhinged strength of a cornered animal. The sharp plastic tore right through the flimsy shoulder strap of my cheap, blush-pink bridesmaid dress, biting directly into the muscle. I could feel a thin, warm line of blood welling up, trailing down my skin. She did not let go. Instead, she reached out with her free hand and snatched a heavy metal tray right out of the hands of a passing waiter. It was loaded with garbage. Half-empty champagne flutes smeared with red lipstick, crumpled food-stained napkins, and used wooden toothpicks. With a vicious upward thrust, Chloe shoved the filthy metal tray hard against my chest. The heavy edge of the silver platter dug into my ribs. 2 crystal flutes tipped over. Stale sour liquor splashed across my collar, soaking instantly into the cheap polyester of my dress. The cold, sticky wetness clung to my skin, smelling like yeast and regret. "Stay out of the VIP section," Chloe hissed. Her voice was low, vibrating with absolute venom, her eyes wide and manic. "Stop humiliating me. You are a pathetic broke IT tech. I told you to stay in the back. If you know what is good for you, take this trash into the kitchen, keep your head down, and play the maid you were meant to be." The heavy bass of the jazz band suddenly faltered. The saxophone player missed a note, distracted by the commotion. The music died. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over our side of the ballroom. Dozens of heads turned. Hedge fund managers, real estate developers, and trust fund wives all stopped their conversations to stare. I was completely surrounded by a sea of tailored Italian wool and thousands of dollars of silk. And there I stood holding a literal tray of garbage, smelling like stale booze, with blood dripping down my arm. I did not look at the crowd. I looked exactly 5 steps to my right. Janet was standing near the ice sculpture, my mother. She held a martini glass by the stem, her posture perfectly rigid. She saw the altercation. She saw Chloe's hand gripped around my arm. She saw the blood on my skin. She saw the sheer, unadulterated humiliation being poured over her eldest daughter in front of 200 people. She did not step forward. She did not drop her glass. She did not tell Chloe to let go. Instead, Janet let out a slow, irritated breath. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were completely dead. There was no maternal warmth, no shock, no pity, just a cold, calculating annoyance. I was an embarrassment to her social climbing. I was a stain on her perfect evening. Very deliberately, Janet tilted her head. She gave a sharp, dismissive flick of her chin, pointing straight toward the swinging wooden doors of the hotel kitchen. "Go." That was what her eyes said. "Take the garbage, go hide in the back with the hired help. Do not ruin this for us." Something inside my chest snapped. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, absolute severing. The final rotting thread of the umbilical cord tying me to this family dissolved into ash. The mother-daughter bond died right there on the marble floor of the Ritz-Carlton. I looked down at the tray in my hands. My fingers curled around the rolled metal edge. I squeezed. My knuckles turned stark white. The metal began to groan under the crushing pressure of my grip. Underneath this soaked, ragged dress, my heart rate did not spike. It slowed down. The heavy, measured thud of a combat commander stepping into a live fire zone. "Did you hear me?" Chloe shrieked finally, letting go of my arm and taking a step back. She noticed the crowd watching and decided to double down, playing the victim. "Security. Where is security? Get this crazy woman out of here." She pointed a trembling finger at my face. "Drag this nobody out the back doors right now. Get her out of my sight before the general gets here. I will not let her ruin my life." 2 hotel security guards in cheap, ill-fitting black suits began pushing their way through the crowd of gaping guests. They unclipped their radios, their eyes locked on me, assessing the threat. They thought I was just an unstable, jealous sister having a breakdown. They had no idea they were walking toward a United States naval officer trained to break a man's jaw in 3 seconds. I stood my ground. My boots felt heavy against the marble. Then I felt it. Pressed tight against the radius bone of my left wrist, hidden under the cuff of the dress, my tactical smartwatch came alive. Buzz, buzz. 2 sharp, heavy pulses of bone conduction vibration. It was not a text message. It was a proximity confirmation. The bypass signal I'd sent an hour ago had been received. The target was inside the perimeter. General Marcus Sterling was walking into the building. The air inside my lungs instantly changed. The fake, heavily perfumed oxygen of the ballroom was violently pushed out. In its place, my chest filled with the phantom smell of gun smoke, ocean salt, and cold, unforgiving steel. The weak, silent, obedient older sister they had abused for 14 years was dead. She was never coming back. I looked at Chloe. I looked at Janet. I looked at the security guards closing the distance. I drew a long, deep breath. The chamber was loaded. It was time to pull the trigger on this pathetic circus. No, I said it quietly. Just one single word spoken at a perfectly conversational volume. But in the suffocating silence of that ballroom, it landed with the heavy, undeniable weight of a live grenade with the pin pulled out. I did not look down at the floor. I did not avert my eyes. I lifted the heavy metal tray loaded with garbage, raising it away from my chest. Instead of turning toward the kitchen to follow my mother's silent, dismissive order, I walked straight forward. I stopped right in front of a circular cocktail table in the center of the room. It was draped in pristine, blindingly white silk set specifically for the VIP guests. I opened my hands. I let go. Crash! The sound of the heavy silver platter slamming against the tempered glass tabletop was as violent as a mortar shell. The glass did not break, but the impact sent a shockwave through the room. Dirty forks and butter knives bounced into the air, clattering onto the marble floor. Half-empty crystal flutes shattered. Stale red wine and cheap champagne spilled across the table, bleeding rapidly into the expensive white silk like an open wound. 200 high society guests physically jumped in their $1,000 shoes. I did not flinch. I reached behind my waist, my fingers finding the tight knot of the cheap floral catering apron they had forced me to wear. I gripped the strings and gave one hard, vicious yank. The fabric tore. I pulled the apron over my head, wadded the ugly material into a tight ball, and tossed it directly onto the pile of broken glass and dirty napkins on the table. Garbage belongs with garbage. I rolled my shoulders back. I pushed my spine perfectly straight, stacking my vertebrae until I was standing at my full height. I lifted my chin, letting the deeply ingrained muscle memory of a naval officer completely take over my body. The slouching, invisible, apologetic maid was dead. "What the hell are you doing?" Chloe shrieked, her face twisted into an ugly, rabid mask, the carefully applied makeup suddenly looking like war paint on a madwoman. "Security, grab this crazy bitch right now." She did not wait for the hotel guards in cheap suits to reach us. Chloe lunged forward. She raised her hand, aiming a sharp, open-handed slap right at my face, her acrylic nails poised to tear open my cheek. She telegraphed the strike a mile away. It was sloppy, completely off balance, driven by pure, unhinged emotion. My right arm snapped up. It was pure Navy reflex. I deflected her swinging forearm with the back of my wrist, completely neutralizing the momentum of her strike before it even came close to my face. In the exact same fluid motion, my left hand shot out and clamped around her wrist like a steel vise. I applied a basic tactical joint lock, a slight, precise twist of the bone. I used just enough pressure to send a sharp shock of pain up her arm without actually snapping the joint. Chloe gasped a real sound of shock this time and stumbled awkwardly forward, her knees buckling under her expensive designer heels. I let go, and she caught herself heavily against the edge of a chair, breathing hard. Instantly, the manipulation kicked in. Chloe cradled her wrist against her chest, squeezing fake tears out of her eyes. She looked wildly around at the crowd of elites, instantly slipping into the role of the brutalized, innocent victim. "You pathetic loser," Chloe sobbed, pointing her good hand at me, her voice echoing through the silent room. "You leech off our parents. You live in our house. You wear the dress my father paid for, and you dare to assault me at my own wedding." The ballroom erupted. The shocked silence morphed into angry, hostile murmurs. The elite crowd suddenly felt very brave. Half a dozen men in custom Italian suits stepped forward, puffing out their chests, ready to play the hero for the crying bride. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Robert pushing aggressively through the crowd. My father's face was beet red, his fists clenched at his sides. I did not take a single step backward. I dropped my center of gravity. I planted my boots shoulder-width apart on the marble floor. I pulled my arms down, pressing them close to the seams of my pants. The muscles in my thighs and shoulders coiled tight, turning my body into a compressed spring. I locked my cold, dead eyes directly onto the throat of the nearest approaching finance bro. It was a textbook close-quarters combat stance. I was ready to drop the first man who stepped inside my perimeter. But I was not bracing for a physical fight with these soft country club millionaires. I could break their jaws and shatter their knees before they even figured out how to make a proper fist. I did not fear a single person in this room. No. I dropped into a combat stance because my trained ears had just picked up something else. Something cutting through the angry shouts and the chaos of the ballroom. Outside the massive mahogany doors at the main entrance. The sharp, violent screech of heavy armored tires slamming on the brakes. The unmistakable rhythmic thud of reinforced tactical boots chewing up the red carpet in the hallway. They were moving fast. They were moving in formation. The storm was here. The heavy mahogany doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom did not just open. They were violently kicked off their hinges. The sound was a deafening, violent crash of splintering wood and shattering brass hardware. It echoed through the vaulted ceiling like a bomb detonating in a closed vault. The fake polite murmurs of the elite crowd were instantly ripped apart. The high society guests froze in place, their champagne glasses suspended in the air. A tide of matte black flooded the room. Over 200 United States Special Operations soldiers poured through the shattered entryway. They moved with a terrifying synchronized fluidity, their heavy combat boots chewing up the plush red hotel carpet. They did not shout. They did not issue warnings. They operated in absolute lethal silence. They fanned out instantly, their bodies clad in full tactical gear, ceramic plate carriers, drop-leg holsters, and matte black assault rifles held in high ready positions. They formed a tight, impenetrable corridor down the center of the massive ballroom, walling off the terrified guests on either side. The suffocating atmosphere of expensive floral arrangements and $1,000 designer perfumes was completely obliterated. In a matter of seconds, the room smelled of raw ozone, gun oil, and cold steel. It was the heavy, unforgiving scent of a real war zone crashing into a fake, pampered world. The crowd recoiled. Men in custom Italian suits bumped into each other, spilling expensive wine on their leather shoes, desperately scrambling backward away from the armed soldiers. Women clutched their pearl necklaces and gasped. Down the center of the newly formed corridor, a single figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway. He walked with the heavy, unyielding stride of a man who commanded oceans. His silver hair was clipped high and tight. He wore the dark, formal dress uniform of the military. 4 silver stars gleamed brightly on his broad shoulders. General Marcus Sterling. Mark, the trust fund groom, was standing near the shattered cocktail table. His face was pale and slick with nervous sweat, but as his eyes processed the 4 stars on Sterling's shoulders, a sickening wave of pure delusion washed over him. Mark's father owned a defense contracting firm. In Mark's warped, arrogant mind, this massive military intrusion was not a threat. It was a VIP entrance. He actually believed a 4-star general brought an armed battalion to a hotel just to show respect to his family's wealth. Mark actually smiled. He dropped his trembling hands, smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo jacket, and puffed out his chest. He stepped away from the safety of the crowd, walking directly into the path of the approaching general. He extended his soft, manicured hand for a handshake, plastering a fake, obsequious grin across his face. General Sterling did not break his stride. He did not look at Mark's extended hand. He did not even look at Mark's face. As he closed the distance, Sterling simply raised his left forearm and swept Mark's arm aside. It was not a punch. It was a casual, brutal dismissal. The physical force behind the general's arm was like a steel beam swinging through a dead branch. Mark gasped as the heavy impact spun his entire body around. He stumbled backward, his shiny loafers slipping wildly on the polished marble floor. He crashed hard into a heavy concrete pillar, the breath knocked completely out of his lungs. The smug, arrogant smile was wiped completely off his face. All the blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking exactly like what he was, a terrified, weak little boy playing dress-up. A few feet away, Robert saw the entire thing happen. My father had been stepping forward, ready to flash his own diplomatic hedge fund smile to greet the military brass. The moment Mark was swatted away like garbage, Robert froze. His arms dropped heavily to his sides. The fake commercial smile froze and shattered on his face. Pure, unfiltered fear finally pierced through his capitalist arrogance. He realized in that exact second that his money meant absolutely nothing in this room. General Sterling marched right past the shrinking men. He did not care about their bank accounts. He did not care about their status. He was walking straight toward the center of the chaos. Chloe was still standing directly in front of me. She saw the general approaching. Panic and pure vanity warred in her wide eyes. She frantically swiped the smeared mascara from under her eyes, tugged at the neckline of her ruined wedding dress, and swallowed hard. She forced her lips into a trembling, seductive smile, desperately trying to play the role of the beautiful, distressed bride in front of a powerful man. She stood directly in his path, blocking me entirely from his line of sight. General Sterling stopped. The disgust on his weathered face was absolute. He looked at her the way a normal person looks at a dead rat rotting on a dinner table. "Move!" General Sterling barked. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that physically rattled the crystal glasses on the nearby tables. "You are blocking my way." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, hoping to use her high-pitched, whiny voice to manipulate the situation. The general did not give her the time. He raised a heavy gloved hand and physically shoved her aside by the shoulder. She shrieked a genuine sound of shock, tripping over the heavy hem of her expensive gown. She collapsed into the arms of a nearby groomsman, her carefully constructed image completely destroyed. Sterling stepped forward. The heavy leather heels of his dress shoes cracked against the marble floor. Clack, clack, clack. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He looked at the torn, ragged strap of my cheap bridesmaid dress. He looked at the fresh blood drying on my bicep. He looked at the pool of spilled alcohol and the shattered glass scattered across the floor around my combat boots. Then his eyes shifted up and met mine. Every single sound in the massive ballroom was sucked out into a vacuum. The breathing, the whispers, the shifting of fabric, it all vanished. No one in the room dared to move a single muscle. The silence was absolute, heavy, and completely deafening. The silence inside the ballroom was absolute. 200 people stopped breathing at the exact same second. The heavy, suffocating scent of expensive perfume and stale champagne seemed to evaporate, replaced entirely by the cold, metallic smell of the armed soldiers locking down the perimeter. General Marcus Sterling, the man who held the military might of the entire Indo-Pacific region in his calloused hands, stood exactly 2 feet in front of me. He did not look at the torn fabric of my cheap pink dress. He did not look at the fresh blood drying on my bicep. He did not look at the garbage scattered across the floor. He looked directly into my eyes. He brought his heavy leather heels together. Crack! The sound was sharp, violent, and echoed off the marble pillars like a gunshot. He snapped his spine perfectly straight, squaring his broad shoulders. He raised his right hand to the edge of his brow, executing a flawless, razor-sharp military salute. He was saluting me, right in the middle of the Ritz-Carlton, right in front of the mother who had just ordered me to hide in the kitchen like a stray dog, right in front of the sister who called me a piece of trash. The man with 4 silver stars on his shoulders was rendering the highest military honors to the designated family punching bag. "Commander Burns!" Sterling's voice boomed. It did not just fill the massive room, it weaponized the air. The sound physically hit the front row of the elite crowd. Hedge fund managers, real estate tycoons, and trust fund brats visibly flinched. "I apologize for the delay, Commander," Sterling barked. His tone was dead serious, completely stripped of any polite social pleasantries. "The secure line was jammed. The Pentagon is holding. The President of the United States is waiting for your direct threat assessment on the 7th Fleet Tactical Grid. The fleet is awaiting your orders." I watched the brains of 200 high society guests short-circuit all at once. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not need to. I snapped my heavy boots together, mirroring his stance. My spine locked into place. I raised my hand in a crisp returning salute. "Ready to report, General Uns," I said. My voice was ice. Crash. To my right, a heavy crystal martini glass hit the floor. It shattered into 100 jagged pieces against the marble. Janet stared down at the broken glass at her feet. Her mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. The arrogant, cold mask she had worn for 14 years was completely gone. She finally realized the daughter she had thrown away was standing on a mountain she could never climb. Chloe looked like a corpse. All the blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her heavy bridal makeup looking like a cheap plastic mask. She gripped the arm of a terrified groomsman just to keep her knees from buckling. "Come, Commander," Chloe stuttered. Her voice was weak, high, and pathetic. She shook her head, unable to process the reality crashing down on her. "But she fixes computers." She's just an IT tech. General Sterling slowly turned his head. He looked down at Chloe. The absolute pity and raw disgust in his eyes were enough to burn a hole straight through her skull. He let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a cruel sound. An IT tech. Sterling sneered, his voice dripping with pure venom. Listen to me very carefully, little girl. Your sister holds the cyber warfare command for the entire Pacific Fleet. She rebuilt our defense grid with her bare hands. If she is personally fixing a computer, it is because that machine holds the classified launch codes keeping this country from burning to the ground. You have absolutely no idea who is standing in front of you. You are playing with a nuclear weapon and calling it a sparkler. Chloe shrank back, completely crushed under the weight of her own profound ignorance. She had nothing left to say. Sterling turned his attention away from her and looked at Mark. The groom was still pressed flat against the concrete pillars, shaking in his custom tuxedo. Sterling stepped right into his personal space and clapped a heavy leather-gloved hand down on Mark's shoulder. He patted him twice, hard. You are marrying into a very dangerous bloodline, son. Sterling said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet warning that carried across the dead silent room. A woman who cannot see the value of her own flesh and blood will always measure your worth by the thickness of your credit card. The second your bank account dips, she will cut your throat without a second thought. Good luck paying the price for this choice. Mark swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked terrified, realizing he had just bought a one-way ticket to hell. Sterling turned his back on the groom. He looked at me, dismissing the entire room of elites as if they were nothing more than ghosts. They did not matter anymore. They never did. The chopper is waiting on the roof, Commander. We are out of time. Understood, General. I did not look at Chloe crying on the floor. I did not look at Janet staring at her broken glass. I did not look at Robert, who was suddenly pushing his way through the crowd, a desperate, greedy look forming in his eyes as he realized his discarded daughter was actually his most valuable asset. They were all dead to me. The 14-year charade was reduced to ash. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. The sea of heavily armed soldiers parted for me. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the manager's private office. I had secured a hardline connection and relayed the initial threat assessment directly to the Pentagon. The crisis in the South China Sea was being handled. I stepped back into the main ballroom. The atmosphere had completely inverted. The arrogant, loud energy of the elite crowd was dead. No one dared to speak above a whisper. The jazz band had quietly packed up their instruments and fled. Chloe was slumped in a gilded chair near the bar. The expensive multi-layered tulle of her wedding dress looked deflated, a massive puddle of white fabric spread across the dirty floor. She stared blankly at the wall, chewing on her thumbnail. Mark was nowhere to be seen. He had likely retreated to a bathroom to throw up. But Robert was different. My father was a hedge fund shark, a pure opportunist. He survived in the financial world by instantly adapting to the shifting currents of power. He saw me walking toward the exit. The fear that had paralyzed him earlier vanished. He plastered on his best commercial deal-closing smile, the fake toothy grin he used when he was about to rip off a client on Wall Street. Alice, there she is. Robert boomed, his voice echoing awkwardly in the quiet room. He threw his arms wide open, striding aggressively toward me. The main event. My God, why did you hide this from your old man? Come here, let us get a picture with the general. He reached out, aiming to throw a heavy, affectionate arm around my shoulder. He wanted a photo op. He wanted to take the blood, sweat, and absolute hell I'd endured for 14 years and turn it into a shiny trophy he could leverage at his next board meeting. He wanted to own my success. I did not step back. I raised my left hand. I caught his wrist in mid-air. I clamped my calloused fingers down hard over his expensive Rolex, stopping his arm dead in its tracks. I shoved his hand away with a short, brutal push. The physical distance between us was less than 2 feet, but the emotional gap was a bottomless trench. Do not touch me, I said. My voice was completely flat. No anger, no tears, just a cold, surgical precision. You do not get to claim victory in a war you deserted 14 years ago. Robert's fake smile faltered. The corners of his mouth twitched. Now, Alice, let us not be dramatic. I was just trying to teach you independence. You do not get to claim this soldier. I cut him off my words, slicing through his pathetic excuse like a scalpel. You threw her in the garbage because you were too cheap and too arrogant to sign a single piece of paper. You made your bet, Robert. You lost. His face flushed a deep, ugly purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. He opened his mouth to argue to deploy some slick, manipulative guilt trip, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the hard, unforgiving set of my jaw and realized the absolute truth. I was not negotiating. I was delivering a verdict. I did not wait for an apology. I did not want one. An apology from a man like him was just another transaction. The past was dead. I turned my back on him. I left him standing there with his mouth open, a humiliated, irrelevant old man. I walked straight across the marble floor toward the heavy glass revolving doors of the hotel lobby. Outside, a massive matte black tactical SUV was idling at the curb. The deep, heavy rumble of its engine vibrated through the thick glass doors. As I stepped onto the stone patio, the long, cheap skirt of the blush pink bridesmaid dress caught on the sharp heel of my strappy shoe. The fabric pulled tight, restricting my stride. The final desperate grip of this family's vanity trying to hold me back. I stopped. I did not carefully untangle it. I reached down, grabbed a fistful of the cheap polyester, and pulled violently upward. Reep! The sound of the fabric tearing was sharp and deeply satisfying. I ripped a massive slit right up the side of the skirt, freeing my legs completely. I gathered the torn, ruffled fabric into a ball and tossed it casually into a nearby brass trash can. I unzipped the heavy canvas tactical bag slung over my shoulder. I reached inside and pulled out my standard-issue combat boots. They were scuffed, covered in dust from a dozen different drop zones, and smelled like leather and old sweat. I kicked off the painful, blister-inducing heels and left them sitting on the polished stone step. I slid my feet into the boots. I pulled the heavy black laces tight, wrapping them twice around my ankles before knotting them off. The familiar tight pressure around my ankles grounded me instantly. I stood up. I took a deep breath of the cool night air mixed with the smell of diesel exhaust from the waiting vehicle. I was exactly where I belonged. 3 months later. I sat behind a massive mahogany desk on the 3rd floor of the Pentagon. The air in the office was aggressively climate-controlled, carrying the faint sterile smell of industrial floor wax and hot server racks. It was quiet, a deep, heavy quiet that only exists in rooms where global decisions are made. I reached out and ran my index finger over the engraved lettering of the solid brass nameplate sitting on the edge of the wood. Colonel Alice Burns. The metal was cold and heavy. The promotion to 06 came down from the Joint Chiefs less than 48 hours after the South China Sea operation. We pulled 130 Marines out of a blind trench without firing a single shot. No casualties. No international incidents. Just a surgical digital extraction. I pulled a stack of classified threat assessment folders toward me, picking up a black pen. My personal cell phone buzzed. It was a harsh, rattling vibration against the hard wood of the desk. I dropped the pen. I picked up the device and tapped the screen. A text message notification glowed against the dark background. It was a number I had not deleted yet. Chloe. I unlocked the screen and read the block of text. Hey sis, Mom told me you got promoted to colonel. Crazy, LOL. Listen, things are really tight right now. Mark's dad was furious about the wedding. He completely cut Mark out of the company trust. We might lose the lease on the townhouse. Can you wire me a few thousand just to get us through the holidays? I know things got a little heated at the hotel, but we are family. We can catch up soon. Love you. I stared at the glowing pixels. I read the words a second time, letting the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it wash over me. Not a single word of apology. Not a sliver of remorse for burying her acrylic nails into my arm until I bled. Not a single mention of the garbage she shoved into my chest, or the fact that she screamed for hotel security to drag me out of her wedding like a diseased animal. She brushed off a decade of psychological abuse and a public execution as things getting a little heated. And Mark's father cutting them off, that was General Sterling's doing. The general told Mark he was marrying into a dangerous bloodline, and apparently the defense contractor took that warning as absolute gospel. Mark was a liability now. The trust fund dried up. The fake elite status was gone. Chloe was broke. So she reached out to the exact same pathetic IT tech she had spent her entire life degrading, simply because I was now a colonel with a guaranteed high-level government salary. I sat back in my leather chair. I waited for the old familiar anger to rise in my chest. I waited for the tight, suffocating grip of family guilt to grab my throat. Nothing happened. My heart rate stayed completely flat. My breathing was slow and even. I did not feel angry. I felt a vast, beautiful, absolute emptiness. She still viewed me as a tool, a biological ATM. The brutal reality of dealing with a toxic parasite is that they never actually change. They never wake up one day and realize they were wrong. They just change the angle of their attack when they realize you suddenly hold the high ground. Family is not the blood running through your veins. Blood is just a random biological accident. Family are the people who hold the line with you in the dead of night. Family are the people who respect you when your hands are empty and your pockets are completely broke. I placed my right thumb against the glass screen. I pressed the small icon in the top right corner. A red menu dropped down. Block contact. A warning prompt popped up asking if I was sure. I did not hesitate. I tapped confirm. Then I swiped left on the main message thread. Delete chat history. The screen wiped clean. It went entirely black. Just like that, it was over. 14 years of manipulation, financial extortion, and emotional abuse were permanently erased from the server. The heavy rusting chain connecting me to the Loudoun County estate snapped in half. I did not need to scream. I did not need to write a long, angry paragraph explaining exactly why I was cutting her off. Silence is the ultimate weapon. You do not negotiate with a tumor. You cut it out. I set the phone face down on the desk. I stood up, grabbing the stack of classified folders. I ran my free hand down the front of my service uniform, smoothing out a microscopic crease in the dark fabric. I walked out of the office. My combat boots hit the polished linoleum of the Pentagon hallway. A heavy, rhythmic, unyielding sound. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of a woman who carried her own weight. I reached the end of the long corridor and pushed open the heavy wooden double doors to the main briefing room. The room was flooded with bright, harsh fluorescent light. Master Chief Henderson was standing near a massive digital tactical map, holding a battered metal travel mug full of black coffee. A dozen other officers sat around the long conference table. Henderson looked up as I walked in. He straightened his posture and gave me a sharp, deeply respectful nod. "Ready for the brief, Colonel?" he asked. "Let's get to work, Master Chief," I replied. I looked around the room at the men and women in uniform, my team, my actual family. I left the rotting, pathetic shadow of the Loudoun County house behind me, locking it in the dark where it belonged. Let the wind blow. Let the frost bite. I am the oak. And I am still standing. Sometimes the absolute best revenge is not destruction. It is a permanent, deafening silence while you go on to live the best years of your life. If you have ever had to cut a toxic relative out of your life to save your own sanity, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing the biggest lesson you learned when you finally cleared the trash out of your life.